The Tides of Torment is arriving, and today I can finally give you my unfettered and unabridged opinion on whether this is worth your money. As always, I'll break it up faction by faction, and I'll round off with my conclusion. Without further ado, let's get stuck in. We'll start with Sayl the Faithless, who leads the Dolgan Norscan tribe. I'm just going to jump straight in and address the gargantuan chaos spawn in the room. Nightmare, not being an actual unit and just being a wind spell, is extremely disappointing. I heard on the rumour mill that CA had trouble animating him. Obviously, I have no game development skills, so I can only look at this through the lens of a consumer, but of all the Tides of Torment DLC, Nightmare was what I was most looking forward to. He was the focus of the original trailer, and to have him relegated as a wind spell is just really shoddy. It's a massive missed opportunity, and it ill behooves CA to leave Nightmare as he is. He should be a legendary hero or a summonable unit like Heinrich Kemmler's Krell. I was very disappointed by this, and I hope it's something CA changes in the future. Even the wind spell animation sort of looks a bit shit, really. We've had things like the Hell Pit Abomination brought to life in Warhammer Total War. It's got multiple heads, lots of details. Personally, I don't understand why there would be technical dramas with Nightmare when you have things like the Hell Pit Abomination in the game. Now, I think CA did plan to include him, or they would have had the creation of Nightmare as the first teaser trailer for this DLC, which is sort of fat shark levels of blundering with your marketing materials, so all in all, just really disappointing with that particular element of this DLC. With that being said, Sayl's campaign is actually a good bit of fun. The Norsca reworks with raiding and pillaging balance nicely, and I like the fast and aggressive playstyle you have to adopt to pay for your armies. It kind of feels like classic Khorne before their rework. Now, I see a good number of folks complaining about power creep across DLCs, and yeah, I'd say Sayl probably fits nicely into that category. He's a very potent spellcaster, he can ride a war mammoth, he unlocks regeneration and passive ward save as well within his skill tree. Regeneration on a war mammoth is terrifying. He also has a host of other abilities. He's just an extremely strong all-rounder lord who I found could solo armies on the hardest difficulty levels, and that's not even with things like the Nemesis Crown or the Sword of Cain. He's just naturally extremely strong. He also has a range of point and click buffs and debuffs which he can afflict on enemies with his ritual mechanic, which is again extremely strong. There's rituals in here which can literally delete entire armies and replace them with an army hostile to that faction. It's pretty nuts. He needs to raise Chaos Shrines in order to progress his campaign victory objectives. However, it feels odd doing so because Norsca benefits so much from sacking and raising settlements, so I think the mechanic of having to build Chaos Shrines as well doesn't really flow particularly well into Norscan gameplay, but it's still good. It's not a deal breaker for me. Me personally, I really enjoyed the campaign, but more in a power fantasy way than something tactically fulfilling. For the units, you get the Bearmen, a solid tier 2 infantry to bridge the gap between Marauders and Marauder champions. Much more armour and better overall defensive stats. These guys will last much longer than Marauders. They also have a great weapon variant for punching through heavily armoured foes. They also only take one turn to recruit, so they're a pretty solid option in the early to mid game, and I enjoyed their implementation. Kurgan Horsemen are an excellent light cavalry. They have the devastating flanker ability, so hitting from the rear or sides will double their charge damage. They can Vanguard deploy too, so they're just very oppressive light cavalry if used correctly. Their low armour means that they're not good at taking charges though, so keep them away from other cavalry units. They have a great weapon variant for dealing with armour as well, but the dual axe variant is still extremely strong with bonus versus infantry. The Cursed Etin and the Cursed Etin Runecaller, I was really excited for these units, and they kind of deliver on that excitement. They're similar to Giants, and Giants aren't too bad these days, but they have an interesting mechanic where they start regenerating health when they drop below 50% hit points, and they have buffs when they're above 50%. The normal Cursed Ettin is slightly better at fighting with armor-piercing weapon damage. The Rune Caller has some bound spells and magic attacks. I personally prefer the Rune Caller, but they're both cool additions to Norsca's arsenal, and their inbuilt regeneration is very helpful. And I think the models look really good on these. The Dreadmaw, now you can roleplay with Dune Sandworms. Now, I quite like these beasts. They give Norsca some long-ranged attacks, which is nice, something which we were really lacking before. They also tunnel around, all sneaky-like. They're very micro-intensive though. They stand still and cannot move unless they're burrowed, and when they're burrowed, they're basically invisible, so I found I forgot about them a lot. That's just me being shit, not really a critique of the unit. Nevertheless, an interesting monster with pretty cool tactical applications. It would be nice if they could burrow under walls in the future. That would make them very handy in sieges. It's not a unit I personally recruited a lot of, but they're interesting and I like their addition. The Vermeer hero is really good. He increases campaign movement range, he has a heap of benefits for Vermeer units, and also some really strong buffs. He also is a very good fighter in his own right, so just quite handy to have around. Bjorg Bearstruck, the legendary hero, joins Norsca, and I have to say I'm a big fan of Bjorgy Boy. He's an excellent fighter, he's very tanky, so you can just kind of toss him into the fray and forget about him. He also buffs your bearmen along his unique line of skills, and gives them and other Marauder units extra physical resistance with his Bear Fang talisman. He also massively buffs your sacking and looting income, so he's just a very handy hero to stick in any army really. But he mainly buffs bearmen focused armies. You also get the Great Shaman Sorcerer, and this is one of those units which I really dislike being locked behind a paywall. Norsca only has one lord choice outside of the Marauder Chieftain, so locking this behind a DLC doesn't seem great to me. But anyway, Shaman Sorcerer Lord, he's really good. He can ride a mammoth, albeit a lot later than the Marauder Chieftain. He's at level 26 he unlocks the mammoth as opposed to the Chieftain's 18. Anyway, they're a really good lord option and I like their implementation, but I just don't understand why they've put them behind the DLC when the models are all still there. You've got the Shaman Sorcerer hero units, so they're not really doing all that much work to this. It would have been nice to have that as a free edition, not as something which you have to pay for to unlock. It kind of feels a little bit like Black Orcs with shields, a bit cheap really. I think this should have just been part of the Norsca rework, not something which you have to pay for. They're an interestingly made lord and I enjoy their implementation. They've got some cool abilities, but they should have been free. Norsca has only had one lord choice for years now, so yeah. They really should have been free. It kind of feels like you're having to pay for Creative Assembly's oversight of leaving the Shaman Lord out when they created Norsca. That's all I'll say, but yeah, it should have been free. Now onto Sea Lord Aislinn with the High Elf Sea Patrol. His campaign's very different, and one could say quite gimmicky. He sails around giving other High Elf factions territory, and whenever he hands over territory, he sets up his own little outpost within the settlement's walls. Because we have so many other High Elf campaigns to choose from that all play relatively similarly, I actually don't mind a more experimental campaign for this lord. This is a bit more of a refined version of the Changelings campaign. This has a bit more flavour, and things are a little bit more clear, but it's still very much a rehashed Changeling mechanic, except you're giving provinces away as well as setting up your own version of a cult inside of them. Speaking of rehashed mechanics, your faction has access to dragon ships, which are basically Vampire Coast Dread Admirals or Dark Elf Black Arcs, floating fortresses that you build up instead of traditional settlements. So you can see your campaign will be one of mobility, recruiting on deck and getting around the map very quickly. You have a lot of different resources to manage, and in the version of the campaign which I played, I didn't feel that they worked very well together. For example, you have Elven Trade, which is meant to be symbolic of the trading health of the High Elves, but it's a currency basically spent like any other. But you need Elven Trade for basically all of your buildings, and it's necessary to get your other resources, like dragon ship parts. But in order to actually afford armies, you'll need to swap Elven Trade for money, but just one money-making building can decimate your Elven Trade. Hello, Editor Blake here. Just want to pop in and say that they've actually changed a lot to do with the Elven trade, etc. Unfortunately, you get a previous version of the game, you play it, you take your time writing a review, and you put all the bits and pieces together, and then it all kind of gets changed around towards the end. That's just the sort of game. Obviously, I whinge a lot about Elven trade here. I haven't actually had time to replay another campaign because making videos is it takes a long time, but you know, they have changed around the Elven trade mechanic a lot since I played it. So a lot of what I'm talking about with the Elven trade probably is irrelevant now, but it was relevant to my playthrough, so I did in fact decide to leave it in. You know, it must have tarnished my opinion of this campaign somewhat, because yeah, it had a big impact. Obviously I don't have unlimited time. I can't keep replaying the campaigns every time they had a new patch. I have a day job and I just didn't have the time to keep up with all the different patches, but this is a very different system now, so take this particular part of the review with a pinch of salt. It has changed a lot since I wrote this script. Markets, for example, they don't actually take Elven trade anymore. They did at the time, and they were decimating my Elven trade, and hence why I was kind of annoyed with it, but they don't anymore. They actually give you Elven trade, so big changes made. Yeah, so long story short, this particular section, not so relevant anymore because of the changes, but it was relevant for my playthrough. It was my experience, after all. Thanks a lot for watching, lots of love from the future. Like this market here is minus 300 Elven trade a turn, whilst the Elven trade generating buildings only net you plus 10 a turn, so you'd need 30 of these outpost buildings to offset the cost of one of these markets. So that's 30 different settlements you'd need to conquer. Now you can upgrade those buildings, but that costs you 100 Elven trade to do so, so you're constantly setting yourself back to try and stockpile enough of this elusive resource. Consequently, I found myself a bit bored and disengaged with the mechanic. Sometimes you set up an outpost in a colony and it comes with a pre-built market which will decimate your Elven trade income. You may not notice it at the time, and then you have the deep joy of running through all of your different outposts to see where this market, which is decimating your trade income, is coming from. It's not a great system. On top of all of this, you have the dragon ship supplies, which I briefly mentioned earlier. More resources to get, which you basically also get from Elven trade, so yet another thing which will be diminishing your Elven trade reserves. It's just not a very well thought out system. There's too much dependency on Elven trade and not enough sort of interesting ways to get it. Now, the version of the game I played is in development, so they could certainly look to change this up when it's released, when you guys get to play it. But I ended up in this odd position where I had truckloads of money but nowhere to spend it because I didn't have Elven trade. Despite Ulthuan being fully secured and vast trade networks between all the high elf factions, there just seemingly wasn't enough Elven trade. Anyway, the mechanics are certainly better than the Changeling's similar mechanics and have a lot more thought put behind them. Overall, I enjoyed playing this campaign, but I have to say I did lose interest in it at around 40 turns or so, which is a short time for me personally. I tend to get good mileage out of a campaign. Normally I get to around turn 100 before I start, really losing the plot with it. Well, let's have a quick look at his units. You get the Lothern Skycutter chariots, war wagons of the sky, but they're a lot more useful. Competent in melee and useful for a bit of mobile poking to provoke enemies to come to your firing lines. They're actually very good at sniping down lords and heroes. These things are everything that a war wagon wants to be. A great choice for some mobile harassment. You also have the bolt thrower version, so you can deal even more damage from a greater range. Another very strong unit. Ship's Company, a solid tier 1 sword and board unit. These guys are pretty helpful in the early game. On the harder difficulties, they get clapped pretty handily enough, but if you're playing on normal battle difficulty, then they'll serve you pretty well. I like their addition. There's a bit more of a variety between the normal sort of elven spear wall with archers kind of dynamic which you normally have, and Lothern Seaguard, so having something a bit different is always quite nice to have. Onto Oceanids. They're a big, tanky, monstrous infantry unit. They've got great resistances, so they can tank a good bit of damage. They're best used on lightly armoured troops, but they can hold the line very nicely, so your ranged units can do their work. The Sea Elemental, one of 2 big monsters you get, is another cool addition. When it drops to a quarter of its health, it'll spawn some Oceanids. It's a nice mechanic, very strong against infantry, and it has similar resistances to the Oceanids, so very tanky as well. The Merworm has some extremely fun animations as it flops around onto units. It's a cool concept. The High Elves are basically the monster faction now. They just have monsters for every occasion. The Merworms are very strong. It has regeneration, it has this Abyssal Cloak ability which blocks missiles for you and reduces enemy leadership. It's just a very strong unit. Now onto your heroes, you get the Mist Mage. I wasn't a massive fan of the Mist Mage personally. The lore of magic doesn't really gel too well with my kind of playstyle, but they can spawn in some Oceanids, which is cool. He's sort of more of a buffer slash debuffer spellcaster, which I don't think really plays as well in Warhammer 3's fast-paced battles. You could maybe remove somebody's armor or missile resistance, but then for the same sort of cost I can overcast a Burning Head spell and wipe out 3 or 4 units of infantry. I just think you can get far more value from the damage dealing spells than you can from dropping buffs and debuffs. But anyway, he's not a bad caster. There was also a legendary hero which I failed to unlock in my campaign. I can't even remember his name. You need to get a heap of Phoenix units or Phoenix guards to unlock him, which I couldn't fucking do because I didn't have enough fucking elven trade. Then you have the Sea Helm. He's quite a bland lord in battles, but he has Bones versus Large, which is nice. He's actually an excellent campaign battle commander because he gives never-ending volleys to your Lothern Skycutter chariots. Unlimited ammo on a flying unit. What could possibly go wrong? And then finally, Aislinn himself. He's also a bit bland on the battlefront, but similar to the Sea Helm, he has some very interesting campaign mechanics. He's all about buffing campaign movement range, so you can actually move obscenely far in one go. Hence why this campaign may also just be a bit more short-lived. He's like a High Elf Scarbrand. Now on to Dechala, the Denied One. Dechala starts in the south of Cathay, and you're initially surrounded by enemies in some greenskins, some Cathayans, and the Golden Order. They'll all be on your doorsteps very quickly, so you'll have to be quite aggressive to get these threats off the board. Luckily, you have heaps of tools and abilities to get this done. Now, Dechala basically plays similarly to the Chaos Dwarves in terms of her settlements. You have thrall camps, which you extract your thralls from, and then you dump your thralls into pleasure palaces, which serve as your flagship settlements, kind of similar to extracting labour and then dumping them into your towers as the Chaos Dwarves. Now, your pleasure palaces are where you'll do all of your hero recruitment and your top tier unit recruitment. You can also boost your pleasure palace settlement levels up in a very similar way to the Chaos Dwarves by expending thralls when you conquer a city. There are some key differences though. For example, thralls are a finite resource which you extract from your provinces. It was actually a mechanic I really enjoyed. It gets you immersed in the evilness of it all, slowly rinsing the land of population and piling them high on the altar of excess. It felt thematic and I really liked the way it played. You also get the Tormentor's Hold, which are sort of a low tier unit recruitment and small buffs city. They're basically what you turn thrall camps into when you've run out of thralls in the province. Anyway, Dechala as a lord is extraordinarily strong. She's stupidly quick and does enormous damage. She's large, but not an enormous target, so she can easily move away and dodge things, and she gets out of tricky situations easily enough. She also gets to equip 2 weapons, so she'll be even stronger. Her army abilities mainly extend to buffing the hell out of Marauder infantry units, which I think is a bit of an odd decision by CA, mainly because Marauders are pretty boring as units come, but the buffs she gives them are pretty fun, and make Marauders serviceable even into the late game. I did overall enjoy her campaign, probably the most out of the 3. Again, more as a ruffle stomp rather than an enjoyment garnered from a display of tactical acumen, Dechala has these inbuilt I win buttons with these fascinations, which can basically turn the tide of battle, so I never really felt that much threat of losing a battle, unless it was an unwinnable siege defence with a pathetic former order strong garrison. Those fascination buffs are absurdly strong, and they do trivialise fights to a degree. They are optional though, so you don't need to use them, it's just hard not to when they're so potent. Now, for units, firstly I'm going to talk about the Demonic Steed mount. This thing is very good for Slaaneshi lords and heroes. It's absurdly fast, it makes your lord really powerful in combat, it's just an absolute menace of a mount. If you're a Slaaneshi player, then this mount is basically a must-have. They're just so useful, I can't stress it enough. They're probably overtuned, but yeah, a really excellent mount option. You're not a massive target, you're stupidly fast, you deal good damage. They're basically a great mount option for any lord or hero. Anyway, let's get stuck into your troops. We'll start with their Druchii auxiliaries. A unit so forgettable that I've forgotten their name, and I've opened up Warhammer multiple times to remind myself of them, but my brain just refuses to learn the name. It's Devotees. Devotees. I think it's because other Slaanesh factions have Devotees as a resource, and my brain just can't disseminate between the two of them. These are really disappointing. The models just seem very rushed and bland. They don't look very Slaaneshi, and they just seem to be shoehorned in as an afterthought. All the models look extremely similar. Proper Attack of the Clones. The dual weapon variant and the crossbows were both very underwhelming. The dual weapon variants are also very expensive, and you've just got better lower tier options to do what they do, so they don't really fill a role either. The crossbows don't really fit into a Slaaneshi army either. I mean, it's interesting to get some ranged units, but there's also this weird way that they form up, where they leave a massive gap between their units, and considering that Dechala starts off with 2 of them, you'd have thought it would have been picked up when they were playtesting it. The Slangors are a far more interesting version of the Dark Elf dual wielders. I've forgotten their name again. At least these guys can Vanguard deploy, so you can employ some interesting tactics with them. They have this buff that as they get damaged, they receive sort of physical resistance and other buffs. But again, they're just something not quite right about them. I always thought Slangors would be a Javelin unit, and I don't know why I formed that opinion. Perhaps someone in the comments section can tell me where I got that opinion from, but I always thought they'd have javelins and be a ranged anti-large unit. So yeah, I was surprised to see yet another melee anti-infantry unit in Slaanesh's bloated repertoire of melee anti-infantry units. A better addition than the Dark Elf units, but that's not a high bar. Then you have the Praeton that joins Slaanesh, another unit which just feels out of place and slapped onto the roster. Now, I'm certain this is a Beastman unit, so I have no idea what it's doing in Slaanesh's roster. Please, comment section, help me out here. What's this thing doing in Slaanesh's roster? I have no idea. It's an interesting unit, but I just don't know why it's part of the Slaanesh roster. I can't really wrap my head around it. I'm a bit of a stickler for theming in my armies, and the Praeton just doesn't really fit into the Slaaneshi theme. Now, onto a unit I did like for Slaanesh, and that's their champions. These guys are really cool as units. They're super fast, they hit extremely hard on the charge, but they will get slapped if you leave them in prolonged combat for too long. They felt like a well-balanced and impactful unit. Good work here. The unit model itself is great up close, but I did notice the unit seems to disappear occasionally when looking at it from afar. There seems to be a few weird graphical bugs, which I think actually happens with Tomb King's Serpentine units as well. Hey, what's one more bug? It's just a small drop in a very large sea of bugs. Overall, I like the Champions of Slaanesh. I think they're a very good unit. Then you have the Pleasure Seekers, or Titty Snakes. These guys, when I played them, I think they were probably a little too powerful. I'm not sure how they'll fare on launch, but these guys were absurdly strong when I played with them. I noticed similar graphical issues, which I saw with the Champions, but they're still a very fun and thematic unit. I really enjoyed using them. A very potent, monstrous cavalry, they're definitely a blast to use. Now you get the Anointed Dark Elf hero. He's a cool option, nice armor, can get a demonic steed. He also has a heap of bound spells and replenishes your units, so he's got a lot of utility on the campaign. A very strong hero option. His 2D porthole definitely needs a facelift. Just look at that thing. Other than that, he's a good addition. Then you have Streakar of the Swordsveneer, a new legendary hero. He's alright. He buffs Marauders. So I think the idea is to have him with Dechala buffing Marauders together. He's got a big low damage disruption explosion and he's a very solid fighter. He also gets all the big mounts, so he's just a solid legendary hero. He feels quite balanced and I like his inclusion. Finally, the Exalted Hero of Slaanesh. He's a pretty standard sword and board hero, nothing which we haven't seen before with other Exalted heroes from the other Chaos gods. He's got a couple of neat tricks up his sleeve in the campaign, and he can ride a demonic steed, so he can turn into a very powerful, fast-moving armoured unit. Overall, a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to the new Slaaneshi units. Some of them feel out of place or underdeveloped, but others feel really potent, and you'd really miss not having them. Now onto the conclusions. This doesn't feel like a year of development. Despite the fact that it's taken a year to get this DLC out, it feels rushed, which is staggering if you think about it. Bugs were pretty rampant in the version I played. Whether they're fixed or not in the launch version will remain to be seen, but this for me has not been a strong DLC. Now this comes with the caveat that I'm not a massive lover of either of the three factions on offer in this DLC, so there is potentially a bit of bias there. High Elves I find a bit bland thematically. Norsca I like, but they've been in a sorry state for a while, so I haven't played too many campaigns with them in Warhammer 3. Slaanesh has an interesting playstyle, but your power is heavily dependent on the map you're fighting on. You're incentivized to be a fast-moving and flanking force, but you can't really do that in sieges, and battle maps tend to be a bit on the small side in Warhammer 3, so flanking can quite often be nearly impossible when the enemy fields a full stack and covers the width of the battlefield. I don't think I dislike any faction in this game. These factions just aren't my favourite, so I just want to make that clear to you too, for the sort of sake of fairness. If these factions are in your favourites to play, then you could have a distinctly different opinion if you choose to purchase these. You could have a distinctly different opinion even if they're not. No, actually, I forbid you from forming your own opinion.
Am I so out of touch? No. It's the children who are wrong.
But one thing that I'm certain isn't linked to bias is the bugs. There are heaps of the bugs in the builds that we were given. Again, it was in active development, so a good chance that certain things will get patched, but long-standing issues are still not addressed. Cafe maps being poorly optimized, the gate bug killing this exalted keeper of secrets, the AI bizarrely marching forwards at my positions, almost like they're trying to walk around and through me. I've noticed the fire at will bug seems to be more prevalent. I've seen more of the AI just walking through your infantry formations to start attacking your backline. Units disobeying orders, like cavalry managing to successfully disengage for you to notice that they're being slaughtered because one model was trapped, so the rest of the unit kamikazes back in. This isn't the BBW, and I promise I will get around to making another one of those, so I won't list everything I ran into, but yeah, it's still the same old buggy Warhammer 3. A big issue which I found so frustrating through my playthrough was chasing down routing units. It's a big part of the game, trying to cripple your enemies as much as possible so your next fight isn't so costly. It's a massive part of Slaanesh's playstyle, because that's how you charge your army abilities. But the unit interactions are all over the place. I watched my cursed Etin Runecaller slowly push the enemy lord off the battlefield to safety. I watched Dechala start circling around the unit she's meant to be chasing, so I'd have to manually intervene and straighten her up to charge properly. I even saw this same behaviour with a war mammoth. Pathfinding for chasing routing units is just awful, and honestly, I cannot believe it's still this shit. With a Runecaller example, that was the first battle I'd fought on the new DLC. When I've flanked a formation and broken a unit, I've seen all my units sort of devolve into a blob where nobody is doing anything and you have to manually pull apart the units so then you can actually chase and kill things instead of trying to merge with them. It's things like this which just drive me bonkers with this game. We're 3 years in and shit like this still happens regularly. Things like this shouldn't be happening and it needs to improve, but after so long, clearly there's no apparent fix for it. No fix for your units pushing the enemies off the map. It's just ridiculous that I have to even dedicate a portion of this review to it. How are these ridiculous looking unit interactions not picked up? Why is chasing down routing units such a massive pain in the arse in Total War Warhammer 3 when it actually was okay in games like Medieval 2? I'm not sure. Maybe they can look to bring in Medieval 2's system where it just touches people and you capture them. I think I'd prefer that than them actually try to land blows on routing units and just not being able to touch them. It's all very strange. Anyway, over the past few weeks I've been playing a few other games. I played The Outer Worlds 2 and was really pleased not to have to deal with any bugs there. I maybe had one crash whilst I was playing the game over sort of 60 hours of playtime, and that was it. I played the closed alpha of Deep Rock's Rogue Core. Again, the only bugs I saw there were ones I was meant to be shooting. I even hopped back into Darktide and was pretty pleased with the performance of the game there. I suppose familiarity does breed contempt, but I just didn't notice anywhere near the same kind of jank and aggravation that I have to deal with when playing Total War, and that's just the truth of it. All in all, I don't think it's a bad DLC, but it's certainly not to the same standard as Thrones of Decay, and I believe it to be worse than the Omens of Destruction. With all that's happened over the past few months, I suppose I'm not feeling as charitable towards CA and Warhammer 3. I want the game to be in a better state. It seems to be one step forward and two steps back with this title. I want CA to succeed. I love their games and I like all the people I've interacted with within their company, but the quality of their output just needs to be better. I saw a comment on my bug waitlist which I think sums it up perfectly. The hardest part for me about looking back on long-standing bugs is I don't even know what features are bugs anymore. The list of bugs which I've been subconsciously playing around is definitely not zero. I couldn't have put it better myself. I don't even know what a bug is in Total War anymore. There's so many issues which are just never fixed that you can't even tell whether it's a bug or a feature. It's so buggy it's blurred the lines of reality. Like with the gate bug, I know if you're attacking units on the walls with flying units, you're more likely to provoke it into happening. As the AI starts disembarking units from the walls, it makes this particular bug more likely to trigger. But in this example, my Praeton flying units were nowhere near the walls, and it just happened. My exalted Keeper of Secrets gets locked into the settlement and mowed down by Dark Shards. And I was really annoyed because I didn't have my flying units attacking the units on the walls, so it was like a fresh gate bug to me. A bug within a bug. An inception of bugs. You're subconsciously working around the bugs which infest this game to make it an enjoyable experience, and even then your workarounds aren't foolproof. It's just very frustrating. These bugs are crippling my enjoyment of this game. I found myself having to force myself to play the DLC at points, which is just wild for me, really. There's just so many good games out there which just don't have anywhere near this level of jank. There's things like Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, where the DLCs have been shit, but I don't care because the base experience is so good. I'm happy to have bought the premium pass for that game because the core game is just such a blast. It's like the inverse of what's happening here, where I like the characters and some of the thoughts behind the DLC itself, but the bugs that are ever present in the core of the gameplay are eroding my excitement for this title. I appreciate you sticking with me, so I'll just summarise my thoughts into a more manageable chunk. There's some good stuff in this pack. I've enjoyed the campaigns on offer, some more than others. Dechala being my favourite, Sayl the Faithless second, even with the notable absence of Nightmare as an actual unit, then Sea Lord Aislinn third. This comes with the caveat that the High Elves are probably my least played faction across all of Total War Warhammer, so you can take that ranking with a pinch of salt. It's just my opinion, it might not be yours. The new Legendary Lords, I think all of them are extremely strong. Probably too strong. They all have lots of things that make the game easier. Yes, I had fun with them, but in a ruffle-stomping the enemy kind of way, not in a my tactics have carried the day sort of way. It's a tricky spot for CA because they want to add in more mechanics, and you want these mechanics to be meaningful, but then every other faction within that race doesn't have those mechanics or an equivalent, so they're just worse than that faction. I appreciate I've just defined power creep to you, but it is tricky in a game like this, and I appreciate you're never going to get things balanced in this game. The power creep doesn't really impact my personal enjoyment of the game, but I know it does for a lot of people, and I can see where they're coming from. Now, there's good stuff in the DLC, but it is brought down by Warhammer 3's legacy of bugs, which really affect my enjoyment of the game. Again, another caveat, which I accept, is I've played this game a lot. The bugs which I see may not be as frustrating to someone who's played this game for a few hours and then sets it down for the next DLC release cycle. But they really affect me, and I think quite a large chunk of the people who play this game regularly. Now, if these bugs gripe you, as they do me, you have to ask yourself if you want to reward Creative Assembly further for this product. Are you happy enough with the current state of the game that Creative Assembly deserves more of your money to play with the new units that they've made? It's a question that the market will answer, and if you're watching this video, then you're probably part of that market. If you like these factions, you'll probably have fun with this DLC. To CA's credit, they've split up the DLC so you can pick and choose which faction, if any, tickles your pickle. Most of the units are enjoyable, the units and factions are all reasonably solid. If you're looking for 3 easy campaigns with their respective factions with 3 very powerful lords. But if you are frustrated with the bugs and the jank of the game, then those bugs and that jank are still there, waiting for you whether you pick up this DLC or not. The question is, do you want to give Creative Assembly more money for this? 2025 was a great opportunity for Creative Assembly to really buckle down and get to work fixing core issues in the game. They've failed to do this, and certainly haven't met the expectations I had for this year. We've had random locations added as a feature, we've had an open beta for a siege rework, which we haven't since heard anything about. We've had this DLC, which is due to release, then 2 small faction updates that broke the AI of those very same factions. Not an awful lot of meaningful output, unfortunately, and I think that should probably give you a good indicator of what Total War Warhammer 3 will lurch onto next. Disillusionment is my main feeling here. I don't think CA have the power to fix the issues which dwell within the game, or they've simply stopped trying to fix them. But as we approach year 4 of Total War Warhammer 3, I'm not holding my breath that they'll ever be fixed. Personally, I'm more leaning towards this as not being worth a buy. CA had a great opportunity after Thrones of Decay to not rest on their laurels and take advantage of the win, and it appears to have been squandered. Old bugs are still active and ever present, new massive bugs are being introduced. It's all just a big shame, really. When you see goofy stuff still occurring in the game, it makes it really hard to recommend purchasing more content for the game. CA have added new free things with the Norsca update and the Mask, and allowing Warhammer 2 and 1 players to jump into Immortal Empires. All of these things are positive, and I don't want to detract from that, but I do feel it's unfortunately too little too late, and the Warhammer 3 horse has already bolted. This DLC is really like nice toppings on a pizza, but you look under the base of your pizza, and there's a small cat shit underneath. It's small, so you think to yourself that maybe you can just eat around the cat shit, but you're still angry that the chef left it in there, and you're still probably going to get a tapeworm. Anyway, that's enough from me. If you enjoyed today's video, please consider liking and subscribing. It really helps the channel out. And I want to give a massive thank you to my Patreons and channel members who are on screen now. I've been Blake, delivering my take. Thank you all so much for watching.